Hello OTCers, Andy here, and yes, club football never stops, as we're more than aware of this weekend, so let's get straight back into what's happening in the coming season 25-26, and with the news that Granit Xhaka is likely to leave Bayer Leverkusen, something that's been on the cards for a couple of weeks but has really accelerated in recent days. We've got to ask, does Granit Xhaka leaving Leverkusen mean that they are no longer contenders? Now, look, I know you must be thinking that there are other things that have really moved the needle for Bayer Leverkusen. Florian Wirtz going, Frimpong going. But even if you think of all the players who were responsible for all those great moments under Xabi Alonso, possibly Xhaka is the key one. Because he was a player who was, as Simon Rolfes, the sporting director, put it, Xabi Alonso himself put it, he was really Alonso on the pitch. Of course, they're very different types of players. Of course, Xhaka does have an enviable range of passing, not quite like Xabi Alonso. Having seen him in training relatively recently, he really enjoys getting on the ball still and showing how good he is, and why shouldn't he? But Xhaka, in terms of being an organiser, in terms of being a coach on the pitch, in terms of, as Rolf has said, being that guy who can be mean enough to say the stuff that all the rest of us are too polite to say, he has been an absolutely key piece for Leverkusen, playing in a deeper role than he played towards the end of his spell at Arsenal. And in terms of being the brain of this Leverkusen on the field, and again, Arsenal fans might doubt this a little bit, Xhaka has been absolutely imperative to the success that they've enjoyed over the last couple of years. So I guess it shouldn't be a massive surprise that he's maybe thinking about moving on when Alonso has left Leverkusen. It feels like the guard is changing a little bit, with Wirtz and Frimpong, of course, being amongst two of them who've gone. What is clear is that they will need leadership going forward into this next era. So are they right to sell him? Well, from his perspective, it's clear that the offer is tempting. He's had an offer from the newly promoted Saudi club Neom, who of course have already got Ben Rama when they were still in the second. They've got Lacazette. Marcin Bulka has gone over from Nice, one of the best goalkeepers in France. So it's clear that they're mounting a very ambitious project. They've offered him a very ambitious salary, as you would imagine. It's meant to be 10 million euros after tax. So if we're talking about the last big contract of Granit Xhaka's career, this is probably it. He was interested earlier in the summer when Milan were prepared to go all the way for him. They wanted to make him the cornerstone of a project. Juventus showed interest as well, and Fenerbahce have given him an offer too. So clearly there are people out there who understand not just that Xhaka is still a really good player, but he's a leader who might like to steer something if you're wanting to give a bit of stability to your project. But from Leverkusen's perspective, as well as Xhaka's, you kind of have to ask, does he continue to make sense in this new era? Now, of course, they didn't want to rip it up and start all again after Xabi Alonso, but to a certain extent, a lot of things were going to change, not just because Wirtz, as their most talented player, went. I think probably a feeling in the dressing room of when Alonso said after the double win that he was going to stay, everyone was keen to stay pretty much, and all of their key players did. So this is a little bit different because a couple of the big players have gone, as well as Alonso going. Although the two things aren't directly connected, you have to ask, I suppose, from a Leverkusen perspective, does Xhaka still make sense in a post-Xabi Alonso environment? Things are going to be very, very different under Erik ten Hag. Now, we've already said when we've spoken about it on OTC that we shouldn't look at Erik ten Hag as Manchester United Erik ten Hag. I think a lot of coaches and players are very different out of a Manchester United context, and you know the pressure that conveys, and that has been clear over the last couple of years. But Ten Hag is someone, just to recap, who's hugely respected for his work with Bayern, with and without Louis van Gaal before. He is someone who has got a lot of respect in German football and is not felt as such a left field choice as a lot of Premier League fans look at it. He's someone who, unlike at Manchester United, will have a board of directors and football management who are really on top of things, who run the club really well, who will give him all the support he needs. And he will need a lot of support because, as we said, change is coming at Leverkusen. And much as they're trying to cap it, much as they're trying to keep the magic in the bottle, there is a recognition of A, that things will change a lot after Alonso is gone, and B, what are realistic expectations anyway for a club of their size? You know, they've got a stadium of 30,000. They're not even the biggest club traditionally in the region. That double was absolutely extraordinary if we go back to 2024, but that was something that was an unrepeatable. Much as they've tried to keep hold of that and keep that going, really grow their image and their brand internationally, is something that's going to take time. If you look at it realistically, and Fernando Caro, the CEO, has talked about this to us when we've spoken to him before, and I've been to Leverkusen a lot over the last couple of years, he said we've got to be realistic about what we are. They're a club that not only has a lesser budget than Bayern Munich, they have half the budget of Borussia Dortmund. And when we look at Leverkusen and what they should be aiming for this season, is it really fair to put them as a title contender? Well, look, I realise we're here in mid-July and the transfer window's not finished. They've had a couple of big outgoings and they'll have a couple of big incomings as well. Of course, Malik Tillman has arrived in what was a big deal from PSV Eindhoven, so he will be a key attacking player for them this season. But he's not a guy who makes you think, even though he's a very, very good player, he's not a guy who makes you think that they're going to be contenders in the Bundesliga and the Champions League just on his own. We have to see who else they sign. I think that does have to be a bit of a return to reality, really. Much as they've done brilliantly in recent years, much as they want to grow, to me it feels as if they can qualify for the Champions League again by finishing in the top four in the Bundesliga, and they can have a decent run in the Champions League to make sure they make lots of lovely money, they get themselves out of the group stages, maybe do something in the knockouts. I think that would be a pretty good first season for Erik ten Hag. And if they can stay within those parameters, I think it's all about developing the team, developing a new philosophy under Xabi Alonso, although we know that Ten Hag from Ajax, ideally, he is someone who wants to go possession based, and you know, in that sense they want to keep going what Xabi Alonso was doing. But I think really this has to be a year to breathe, to be realistic, and in that sense going for at least a semi-rebuild, I think is a sensible thing to do. It's sensible for Xhaka, whose career really as at Leverkusen has been about high achieving, reaching for the stars and believing you can win everything. And you know, I remember going to their game against Bayern in the Ligue in February, speaking to a couple of the players afterwards for OTC, and Jeremy Frimpong was quite open. Look, we believe we can win everything. We've been coached to believe like that. Now, look, I'm not saying that Erik ten Hag shouldn't aim big, but I think there has to be a pinch of reality as well, and that's something that the club will factor in when they look at his performance, when we get halfway through the season, when we get to the end of the season, and they're still really optimistic that it will be a fruitful and long relationship. And when we're talking about Ten Hag having the room to really work on making his own Leverkusen, I think you have to ask as well, is Xhaka a block to that? Because he is such a strong personality, someone who always says what he thinks, which was really valued under Xabi Alonso. It's something that they really needed. As we said, Rolf has said sometimes you need someone to say stuff like that. I think Erik ten Hag needs to find his own totems of the team. And in terms of playing, I think they can definitely replace him. If you look at the players they've got at the moment, they've got Ezekiel Palacios, Robert Andrich, Germany player who's a real leader, a real spokesman, someone who is really keen to know what his role would be this season, and I think would have left if Xabi Alonso would have stayed. We can also say that about Jonas Hoffmann in a different position of the pitch, but someone who's experienced and a leader as well. And of course, Alex Garcia, who came in after doing such a brilliant job at Girona in that very same zone of the pitch that Xhaka plays in, who's got a great range of passing, who's brilliant from set pieces, and had a decent first season at Leverkusen without actually dominating the team. Maybe this is his moment to step up as well in a post-Xhaka scenario. So I understand if it gets to the point where Xhaka does accept this Neon package, and it looks like he's aligned on the contractual side of it. Really now it's for Neon and Leverkusen to agree a deal. I think if we're getting much above 10 million, it's something that they will see as a decent deal. Of course, Xhaka at the moment is contracted to 2028, so by the time he completes that contract, I mean, I don't think the back end of it's going to look great. He's going to be nearly 36 by the time that happens. I think Leverkusen, being Leverkusen, not the Leverkusen that we've talked about as the multiple winners, the unbeaten team of 23, 24, but Leverkusen as being a team that's consistently at the high end of German football. They've always been quite frank and quite clear about what their place in that is, that they're not one of the biggest clubs in Germany, or maybe they're one of the biggest clubs in Germany, but they're not absolute European elite level just yet, even if that's something they're aiming for. They're hoping to expand the stadium, they're getting a new training ground, that's part of their plan. All of these things are building towards them being an elite club, or at least pushing towards the elite, a little bit like Atletico Madrid did in the aftermath of their successes in the early part of Diego Simeone in 2013, 2014, 2016, etc. That is all going to take time. And in the meantime, I don't think the Leverkusen DNA is going to change, and I don't think it should. I think they accept that every player has an end point where you have to consider their value, and can we move on, can we recycle? This is something that they've always done. I think even post-success, that's what they hope to do. You speak to people at the club, you speak to Caro, you speak to Rolfes, and they've always had that understanding that we've had brilliant success, but let's not forget who we are, and let's not forget what we're about. And by appointing Erik ten Hag, who feels like a relatively safe appointment to me, again, despite what people who watch Manchester United a lot under him might think, and just really being brutal, cutting back on players who've maybe had their moment leading the team. I think this is quite smart. It could be good for Granit Xhaka, and it could be good for Leverkusen as well, even if a lot of fans will be really sad to see him go. Thanks for joining us, as you do every Monday here on the OTC YouTube channel. We are back every Monday with a take on one of the big stories in the weekend of European football. And of course, there's the podcast on your podcatcher of choice, me, Dot Adebayo, and guests every Thursday. And we answer your questions on a separate pod, Ask OTC, every Friday. So please leave those below the line, get at us on the socials, and watch out on your podcast feed for a couple of special interview episodes that are coming up as we enjoy it this summer. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.